Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 20th meeting of the Transportation Committee. We have members of staff, members of our committee resident members, as well as the Sheriff's Office. Thank you for coming. So first order of business is the approval of minutes from our April 15th meeting. Ladies, any comments?
No, I make a motion to approve.
And I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so passed. So jumping right into our committee discussions, the first, we had a speeding concern on Meadowview Drive. So this is one that I think came in over the winter, early spring. It's taken us up to now to get some nice weather to be able to put the traffic counters out, not have the plows scrape them off the road. So we installed them last week and actually just pulled them today. So I'll throw it over to Aimee to give what we found out.
Data is like fresh off the press. So we put down the counters in 2 locations. So one right up near Penfield Road up here, and then actually kind of right down like along this straightaway on Meadowview. So I'll talk about the north section first. We saw a 25, starting over. Speed limit's 25 miles an hour along the whole stretch of road. We saw an 85th percentile speed of 27 in the area up near Penfield Road. So I also put that into our traffic calming analysis spreadsheet, which is based on the guidelines that the committee came up with several years ago. And I think the volume of traffic was really the only ding against it. So in this case, no physical measures would be warranted, and it would just be educational passive measures in that north location. So in the more southern location, again, the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. And we saw an 85th percentile speed of 32 miles an hour, so slightly higher. Looking at the traffic calming analysis, the volume was actually lower in this location. It was about half of the northern location, but the speed was obviously a little higher, so that was the only point here. Again, that totals up to be only considering passive measures, so no physical measures would be warranted at this time.
Is that considered a cut-through street? Is that why there's that much traffic?
The only place you'd be cutting through, I think, would be 2 other locations in the neighborhood.
That's what I'm thinking. It's probably just their neighbors speeding through.
Yeah, but it would be kind of a tough cut through. It's pretty, there's no straight shot anywhere to another main road, so,
Yep.
yeah.
So we can share that data back with, the resident with the concern. We did the analysis. It's showing, again, as we always say, people speed, it might be slightly higher, but, that's kind of within the norm of where that 85th percentile is. We're not condoning speeding, but, it's kind of within that normal realm we see everywhere. If it continues to persist, we've got our feedback cart. We can add that to the list that's out currently on Panorama Trail. So I don't know if anybody's gone that way. We've got that out and operational. We've used the Sheriff Office, their speed cart, in spots in the past. So we'll look between those for that passive, feedback, to the motorist to make sure that they understand the speed and are aware. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be much above, every other area. It doesn't help what's in front of your house, and you get those few one-off people that are going faster than normal, but the vast majority of people are traveling pretty close to the speed limit.
Yep.
So I don't know if the committee has any other thoughts at this time. I think we just, again, share the data back with the resident, and then if they have continued concerns, we can put the feedback card out at some point in the future.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I agree.
So the next item is we had a request for a stop sign at Hallmark Road, and again, I'll pass this back to Aimee.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Yes, so Hallmark Road. I think there's also concerns of speeding here, and so the resident was asking if there could be a stop sign installed at the intersection of Hallmark and Holly Ridge Circle, or speed humps, something of that nature. We don't have really like any current counts on this road, so I think the next step here would be putting out the traffic counters and just finding out what kind of speeds that we're dealing with. In general, we follow the MUTCD, so in those situations of speeding, stop signs aren't allowed to be used as the speed control device. So, but we can definitely, find out what the speeds are here and go from there.
Yeah, we can go out while we're out, look at the sight distance, if there's any other mitigating factors, why stop signs might be warranted. But we can obviously do some data collection before we provide anything to committee.
You're coming into a four-way, like, intersection. You normally slow down. I literally just listed a house down on Holly Ridge, and it's a very quiet neighborhood. Okay.
Again, you think most people will. I'm sure there's some people that don't, and I'm sure that maybe
Oh, yeah.
cause the concern. So
Yeah,
people,
I get it. Just like our intersection there at Embry and Scribner, where they just blow through the four-way stop sign. So, stop sign sounds like a great idea. It doesn't work.
well, I mean, there's space, they're warranted, and then to put them in, a spot that they're not.
Right.
Kids think that the car is going to stop, and it may ultimately create a unsafe situation. If you think
Correct.
they're going to stop, they don't, and now, you created, an even worse situation. So that's why we closely follow the manual and make sure we,
Yep.
compliance with the, federal highway regulations.
Yep.
So I think for that one, for now, that's, we'll collect data and get back to the committee, so we'll put that as a held item.
Okay.
And we'll collect that data between now and our June meeting. So our next item, we've been talking a while about our new policies or guidelines. So we've developed guidelines for a crosswalk, the rapid reflecting flashing beacons, the RFBs, and the speed hump guidelines. Since we've had many, many requests for all of those, we thought it prudent to have a policy similar to the analysis that Aimee went through with, as we look at speeds, what measures are taken. Let's, be analytical about it. Let's collect the data. Let's see what makes sense. So, similarly, we put forth some draft guidelines, looked at what other communities have, and then I think we've discussed them a couple of times. And I don't know, Aimee, if you want to kind of recap those quickly. And
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so, like Mark mentioned, we've got the 3 policies that we would be looking to adopt in the near future, so the crosswalks, the RFBs, and the speed humps. I know that they've been to this committee a few times, and there were some comments from the committee that we incorporated, so there was questions about remaining consistent with defining acronyms throughout the document, so that's been incorporated. I know that there was also reference to the MUTCD in one of the guidelines, so there was a comment about adding the New York State supplement to the MUTCD as a reference into the guidelines, so that was added. And I don't think we've, other than those comments on these policies, I don't think there were any other comments from the committee. So at this time, if anybody has any additional questions, otherwise we could take a look at adopting the guidelines.
so I had a conversation with the town attorney, whether these need public hearing or not, and he basically said that this is guidelines for this community here. So if this group is supportive of those and wants to adopt those, we can go ahead and do that. And then we would just inform the town board, that these have been adopted, and then these are the guidelines going forward. So as people request, any of the above, we do our same due diligence and collect the data, and then, follow this process, and then come back before this committee, after those have been completed. So, based on what Aimee's review and everything else, I don't know if anybody had further comments or if we're ready to move ahead with adoption of them?
Oh, they look really good.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing, as long as these are considered a guideline rather
that's-
than a policy.
Yep, and that's what we said, they're not,
was the thing.
To
that's why they're
follow.
not going to public hearing, that's why they're not going to an official town, whatever, they give us information. This is a recommendationary body ultimately to the town board, so the town board, even if this committee recommends for or against, it goes to the town board, so that's why we name them guidelines, so that kind of gives us our processes for looking at them, and then ultimately we'd make the recommendation to the town board, and then the town board would, by resolution, as we've done in the past, add new stop signs or, other, traffic measures.
Is there any desire to make these available to the public via the web or anything?
We will, I
Okay.
mean, we've,
All right.
they've been in a draft.
fine.
They've been in a draft mode right now, so.
Yep.
We don't share draft documents, so it's just been under consideration by this group. If they're adopted as guidelines, then yes, we would put them on the web and making them available, under our traffic section, so the public can look at those,
Okay.
and we can direct them there if they are asking for a crosswalk. Send them, here's what we're going to look at, here's what you need, here's, what the committee is going to take into consideration for, when and if those are granted, so they can understand, and then, we can have a very, consistent process as we look at them. It's not, well, we're giving you one, but why
Right.
didn't we give somebody else?
Right.
No, we're going to, same as we follow the MUTCD, we're going to follow our policy, our guidelines, and go through those so we can have a consistent approach, and we're not just showing favoritism to anybody or, why that was determined to be.
So along those lines, I mean, when you have these type of guidelines similar to the previous request where we had, stop signs for speed control, kind of that frequently asked questions kind of comes to mind to say, hey, you could just put that out there because it's not a town thing, it's not us, it's the way it is. And maybe it deflects some of those, oh, they're not going to do it because you don't put stop signs up for speed. Kind of that same,
Something we could look at doing
Yeah.
an FAQ, on the
because it seems to be a
website at the same time.
recurring request, right?
Yep.
And the reason it's we say no or it's not recommended is for the same reason, so. Not that everyone would go look at it or read it or even care, but
Precisely.
if it's pretty mundane, sometimes it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, but it's a good to have it, this is where we're coming from, and this is the what and the why.
Reiterate your,
Again, it's on the website, it's,
yep.
adopted guideline of the committee.
And yeah, I'll reiterate, these policies guidelines are all based on either county or city
Right.
guidelines, so they would be consistent with the region and areas around here.
Anybody want to move for adoption if we're good?
I'd like to make a move that we adopt the guidelines as written.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, so adopted. Thank you. So the next one came up, it's come up before, so as we talk about sidewalks and bicycles, we in the past, and we just did a quick search of our code, we in the past had a section in our code that basically says, no bicycles over 20-inch diameter wheels shall ride on a sidewalk. So basically, that was a policy or a code intended that kids can ride on sidewalks, but it's not for, adults to be on sidewalks. As we've gotten into mixed use, the area along 250, we're looking at shared pathways, wider pathways. I think in those areas, obviously you can have a bike and pedestrians at the same location, sharing the pathways. So we've had more requests, and it most recently came up with the state DOT is looking at redoing Atlantic Avenue, Browncroft from Qualtro to 590. So right now, as if anybody's ridden a bike, the Atlantic Avenue, a lot of our east-west corridors, Empire Boulevard, are very tough to ride a bicycle on. Atlantic Avenue, Browncroft, you go down the hill, you kind of have a shoulder, you get to the top of the hill, right, get up to White Village, the curb ends, and you're kind of pushed back into the travel lane. There is no bike path, there is no, shoulder. Amy's pulling it up on the screen now, so as you look close to the last house, kind of on the end, that shoulder kind of ends, and then it just dumps you right back into the travel lane. So as part of that, we talked to the state about making a wider sidewalk through there. Amy's pulling up, I think it's just back a little bit. So you kind of have the guide rail, and then there is a bit of a bike lane shoulder on the side, and then the curb dives back into the edge, and then, so if you're riding a bike, basically you're thrown into the travel lane, there is no shoulder for you. So as they're redoing that area, we asked the state to look at putting in a wider sidewalk. So they're installing sidewalks, they're proposing them at 7 feet wide. So if it's a little wider, so if you are riding a bike, hopefully you could go up and then traverse that section, on a sidewalk and move being in the travel lane, and then continue up towards Creek Street or Blossom. And
So is the sidewalk going to go all the way down to the expressway?
it is not, it would just tie into the shoulder, so you kind of
Okay.
bike on the shoulder, and then you could have a sidewalk at the end that you could go on and
Okay.
and then traverse in there. So we've had requests in other locations to make sidewalks wider, which we can attempt and try. As we're going around right now, we're trying to get sidewalks around for the Jackson Plank 5 mile, as the town board requested. Some locations, it's a struggle to get residents on board with a 5-foot wide sidewalk, let alone 7, 8, or 10. But I think there's other areas that, Shadow Pines is a request for this year, and I know I'll be speaking tomorrow night with the town board about setting up our annual input session for the community to come out and share the spots they want to see, sidewalks or pathways. So I think there's other spots in Shadow Pines that, we may look to put a path in, whether it's asphalt or, or shared use. So the question has come up is, to this committee, are we supportive, or, would we look in favor of shared sidewalks, pathways between bikes and pedestrians? And then first question was, is it still in our codes? We did an initial search of our code. I don't believe it's in there any longer that prohibits the use of bikes on a sidewalk. Obviously, there's some, or can be some issues with interactions between bikers and pedestrians. I think we'd need to look at, pedestrians should have the right of way over bicycle, no electric-powered motorized vehicle on a sidewalk, if we were to consider it. But, so this is more of, I think, kind of a discussion item tonight. I don't think we're going to decide and finalize that tonight, but I know the request came in. The gentleman, Tim Murphy, couldn't be here tonight. He's got another event, but he wanted to come and share. So I said I would, bring it to the committee and just kind of put it out there as we start to talk about sidewalks. Knowing about this one DOT one, the mixed-use area, I think we're starting to see more locations that those may make sense. And then I think as a group, we got to look at our support for that, and then where and when those make sense, and then what sort of signage, do you have that share the bikeways, or, to communicate that, with the public as they're walking and biking around, that they know that they can be shared. I think you see some true mile bikers want to be on the road no matter what. They're going to be in the travel lane, and, that's where they're comfortable. Other families are going to be, with their kids on a sidewalk, and, maybe not quite the same as a road bike. So I think we're going to have to look at, some signage, and, when and where are we supportive of that, and then, how does that, either become a policy or, something in our code for that. So tonight, I just kind of throw it out there as a discussion item. I don't have anything for us to really act on, but just wanted to share that recommendation, or that request from the resident. And then obviously, as we're looking, moving forward with the state project here, this may be one spot that makes sense if they can do a 7-foot wide sidewalk in that area. It's a little bit wider, than just a normal 5-foot pedestrian walk, but could be a nice option for somebody riding a bike down or up Browncroft to have a spot to, continue on and not be thrown right back into the traffic.
So that's one thing you're talking about as far as
The state
opening it up.
is going to be
the
doing
state,
that. Yep, so the state, it was they call it a mill and fill, but basically just a purely maintenance. They were going to mill the road off and then repave it. They shared that with us, and we said, hey, while you're looking at it, we know this really isn't it, but can you look at these spots? There's some existing areas, and let's extend sidewalks. Let's make bike lanes better. We've even asked them to pull back the center median that turns left into White Village. It's kind of a very short, if you just back up. So if you're coming up the hill, going eastbound, if you live in the White Village neighborhood off to the left, there is a protected turn lane, but it's a very short instance. So if you're coming up the hill, you kind of quick got to dive over. As you can see, it's a really short area. So since that they're looking at redoing the drainage down that corridor, to me, it made sense, let's pull that median back a little bit, let's give them a little more space. Now it can become more of a deceleration lane. You can kind of get off, pull into the middle, slow down a little bit, then feel like you're in the passing lane going up the hill, and people are, riding up behind you, and then you got to dive over.
So then the state would put in some kind of rules about that themselves?
I think they'd look for us to do that. I think they would put it in most often when the state does new sidewalks, they become ours. So they say, we'll install them, but you, Penfield, need to maintain them. So as they're looking at this as a summer 26, fall 26 into 27, so we've got some time. But I think they're going to end up handing it off to us and saying, okay, we installed it. And then town, we've got to look at, what do we put for signage? So I think that's something we need to start considering in the next,
Okay.
few months. And then as we look at, future sidewalks and pedestrian bike connections. And then as the active transportation group is going to be coming back, again, that's going to come up, back with that project as interconnections between properties and parks. I think that'll be a kind of a consistent theme, is how do we make things both, pedestrian and bike friendly, and how do we do that? So
I think
thought
it's
it was-
just education.
And that's why I say we need to look at
Yeah.
signage, and again, I don't think we need to invent it. I'm sure it's out there. We can do some research.
Yep.
Other communities are, doing similar things, but I just thought it was kind of timely to bring it. And then as we get into the active transportation, we'll, be back with more, conversation with this group.
Okay.
Are they proposing a bike lane on?
They are not. So they're not calling it a bike lane,
All right.
but they were open to making a wider sidewalk. So we said,
Yeah, but only on
There's-
the north side.
south side. So the north side, we've
There is
got,
no sidewalk on the south side, is there?
no, they're
So
adding
they're
it.
putting it.
Oh, okay.
They're adding it in. So as you come up the hill,
Okay,
going
so
eastbound.
adding new
It-
sidewalk.
it ends, new
Not making it
sidewalk.
wider.
Correct.
Adding new.
New sidewalk coming in, so there is no sidewalk now. We said right
Yep.
now
All
that
right.
shoulder ends, could we, if you're putting sidewalk in, go 7 feet wide instead
Yeah,
of,
okay, all right.
and I think they're going to basically do a integral sidewalk and curb, so it's all together, because there's not much of a tree lawn, so they've got to replace the curb. The number of years of paving, they're down to, an inch or 2 inch of reveal on the curb, so they've got to do some modification of the curb anyway, and then do an integral sidewalk with that, 7 feet wide on the edge, so you could have room for a, a bike lane or a
Could
bike.
fill it with snow.
You can just throw snow on top of it.
It's kind of a wide road. Okay, I got it. I was just wondering, because when you have a bike lane, then you can put them into the lane and have the bike in lane and the sharrows and all that, and that's a whole different
Yeah, it's
scenario
not
than what you're talking about.
quite that.
Right. Okay.
It's kind of, in
It's a
between.
shared,
so-
it's a multi-purpose shoulder, which I support those more than bike lanes.
Yep. But then as it ends, then what do you do from there? So, a wider sidewalk kind of made sense to them. So they're still
Yep.
working on their design. I believe it's putting out to bid, later this summer with a 2026 construction. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Okay. So we had 2 other comments come in, and again, these are under other jurisdictions, so we're just basically bringing this as informational. So the intersection of Wayland and 5 Mile Line, there was a request for a left turn signal. So those have turn pockets, but there is no turn signal at those at this time. Both of those are county roads, so that would fall under the county's jurisdiction. So we will make sure that if it hasn't been already, pass that on to the county, have them look at that, and then that's something Aimee can pull up, the street view. So the east-west on Wayland Road has a turn pocket for it as you approach the light, but there's no dedicated turn arrow. As always, a turn arrow takes away time from the through traffic, so, that's something they would balance out, but that doesn't fall under us. It's 2 county roads, so it's a county jurisdiction. They get to make the determination, but, we'll ask them to do the study and to take a look at what makes sense, and then report back, 1 to the resident and then 2 to us. So that was, again, just informational to share with the group that the request was received. We encourage them to reach out to the county DOT. I don't know if they have, but we'll make sure that we follow up and do that as well. And then the second request was concerns of speed and potential modification on Jackson Road extension. So this is the piece south of what I call Old Jackson Road. But as you head towards Wayland, again, that whole section of Jackson Road is under the county jurisdiction, so that would be something that, again, we'd share with them, whether they want to put out speed carts or, count them or whatever. We'd have them, do that assessment analysis and then respond back to the resident as well. So it's not up to us to look at the speed or adjust the, the speed in that area that falls under the county's jurisdiction. Any questions on those?
It's always been a mystery to me why those shoulders are so wide.
And yeah, that question came up
back
last
in
year.
pitched. What's that?
And pitched.
Oh, yeah, they were
they-
built like this was going to be some kind of state road or something.
It's a very wide
Yeah, I think they're like 8 feet.
section through there, the road, the shoulders are wide. So there are some sidewalks in there. There's other sections that don't have sidewalks. So sidewalk request came in last year.
Yeah.
We said we'd put the sidewalks outside of that. They wanted the road reconstructed and said, the road should be basically brought back into a normal size. Do I disagree or not?
Yep.
But again, it's under the county,
Right.
that'd be $1 million plus project to dig up the road, readjust the drainage, shrink the roadsides, move the sidewalks. That was a bigger scope, but, originally the request just came in for sidewalks, and we said, well, we can look at putting a sidewalk, we'd need easement through properties, and they're like, well, we're not giving you an easement, it's just fix the road, and then the sidewalks can move forward. And it sounds simple enough, but a couple $1 million in somebody else's jurisdiction, it's not
Change the
that
right
easy of it. Yeah, not that easy of a change, so.
And this road was on the county's docket for the mixed use or shared use with the bicycles. They wanted to make them shoulders actual bike lanes. I don't know if they're going to go through with that or not, but that was one of the things that they were looking at for that particular
And when it's
section
a
of road.
dedicated bike lane, you need signage every 200
Right.
feet saying it's a bike lane and striping on the road. And
Right.
I know we've talked about that a while ago in Harris or Salt, and just again, we like the intent, but a sign every 200 feet, maybe in this area wouldn't be as noticeable. But out on Salt Harris and a country road, you just look down the street and just see sign after sign for a mile. And then there are responsibility if somebody hits them, damages them, the county would put them in once, and then for there on, in perpetuity, it's, the town's cost to, replace them. So in that eastern area, we kind of decline that. If this area made sense, then, it's something we could take a look at, but I haven't heard any more from that in a while.
Yeah, well, like I said, I told them that the town was not really interested in taking over the signage for it, so.
Again, supportive of biking, supportive
Right.
of the shoulders, but to make it a truly
Designated.
designated bike lane, it comes with very distinct signage, very distinct, stuff that has to go with that. And does that become more burdensome than the benefit that you get from,
Right.
the shared bike lane? Okay. So we do have a few held items still. I'll just not get in depth, but the first one, the stop sign at Poplar and Burroughs. This is a sight distance thing, so I actually wanted to wait until the trees leafed out. So now that it's out, I think we've got time on the calendar next week to go out and look at that. So weather determines whether a stop sign versus a yield sign is needed is based on the sight distances available. So doing it during the winter, you could probably see through the trees and the shrubs, so it wasn't an issue. But now that things are leafed out, we'll go do that data check and then come back in June with information on that. And then Willow Pond, we're collecting data now, so we'll collect the traffic counts and speeds, and we'll be back in June with that information to look at next steps. Anybody have any new business items to discuss tonight?
I don't have anything.
Okay. With that, our next meeting will be June 17th. Until then, we'll be adjourn this meeting at 5:30 PM. Thanks, everybody, for coming.